Okay, welcome to lecture number 3.1. This lecture is actually going to be on cells. We've already started reading a little bit about cells, but this is going to be our first introduction into the basics of cells. So today we're going to review the cell theory, the basic parts of a cell, and the differences between animal, plant, and bacterial cells. When we get through that, then the next section we'll be moving on to is what makes up the inside of the cell. So that's where we're heading. Let's start with the cell theory. Okay, so you remember from the video yesterday, actually, that there were several different prominent scientists who were involved, all involved in contributing to what the cell theory was, or came to be. Leeuwenhoek, the first man to see microscopic organisms underneath the microscope, remember he called them animalcules. He was actually seeing those off of people's teeth. Okay, so because people hadn't brushed their teeth, he was able to collect bacterial cells, look at them under the microscope, and realize that these things all look pretty similar. Okay, Robert Hooke then took that information, and remember, scientists work together. Robert Hooke took that information, looked at it a little further under a microscope, and realized that they all looked like little chambers. So he named them cells. And that's where we get the name from. Schleiden and Schwann actually worked together, and these two scientists came up with the idea that all animals and plants were made of cells. And this basically comes out to be that, living things, right? Living things are made of cells. So they were looking at animals and plants. Each one of those was all made of cells. Finally, the last part of the cell theory, which Virchow came to really talk about here, is that all cells come from pre-existing ones. Okay, so you were at one point a one-celled organism. Then you split into two-celled organism, and then a four-cell organism, and after a lot more divisions, you get to you. Okay? So you are made of, get a smiley face on that guy. You guys are made of trillions of cells, yet you started from one single one. So cells coming from pre-existing cells is the last part of cell theory. Okay? So that's it. That's the history of it. With the cell theory, you really got to remember these basic three rules. All living things are made of cells, right? Just finished talking about that. All cells come from pre-existing ones. We did just talk about that too. The one we did not just mention a second ago, but is actually just as important, is number two here. Cells are the basic structure and function of all living things. That goes back to characteristics of life. Remember, according to the characteristics of life, cells are what living things are made of, right? So if that's what they're made of, then they must be the basic structure of living things. Okay, so that's the theory. Moving on to cell size. Now, you may be thinking, well, yeah, sure, I'm made of trillions of cells, but why are they so small? Okay, we're actually going to talk about this a little more in class, but it has to do with efficiency. Okay, now think of it this way: if you, let's say, you were standing at the end of a hallway, right, and you had to carry, 100 pounds or 100 sandbags, right? Let's put a little pile of sandbags over here. You have 100 sandbags to carry. You've got to get them from point A to point B, point A, point B, and your friend over here is going to help you, but he's only going to really, or she is only going to meet you halfway to get these sandbags. It would take a really long time to carry one sandbag from one side to another. You have to constantly walk back and forth, back and forth. Now, if instead of doing that, you had a bunch of friends help you. So, here are your friends getting in a line, and you still have to move those 100 sandbags, and your friend over here is still going to receive the 100 sandbags at point B, and you at point A are going to have to start the movement. Which one would be faster? Taking 100 sandbags yourself to your friend at point B, or passing one sandbag along one by one to each person and creating this giant line of sandbags as they move down the row? Of course, it's this one. Okay? This one is more efficient. If your cells are all very small and right next to each other, they can pass messages along very quickly. One person can move a signal through your body, or I'm sorry, one cell can move a signal through your body extremely quickly. If your cells were gigantic, like big blocks of or blobs of organelles, then a signal would take an extremely long time to get from one cell to another. Okay? So the idea behind this is that your cells are small so that they can communicate quickly. Okay? So that's why cells are small. And that's why you have trillions of them. All right, next thing, we're going to move on to common cell features. Now, when we talk about common cell features, we are talking explicitly about, well, every cell. Okay? So that's bacteria. We're talking about plants. We're talking about animals. Especially talking about you. Okay? Well, that's not you. That's yo. What am I doing? You. Okay, so we're talking about every cell. Since cells make up living things, every cell must have these things in it. First thing is a membrane, a barrier. Okay, they must be able to protect itself from the outside world. A cytoplasm, an interior or inside of the cell. Okay, this is really kind of like a fluid, but it is just as necessary as air would be in our environment. Okay, a cytoskeleton. The skeleton is just what it sounds like. A skeleton that is a system of microfibers or structure. Okay, you have bones, that's your skeleton. That cell needs something to hold itself open. And then finally, ribosomes. And ribosomes are where proteins are made. And remember from biochem, proteins do work. If you don't have proteins, you can't do work. Your cells cannot do anything. So they are needed in every cell. Now, animal and plant cells, right here and here, animal and plant cells are more complicated than bacterial cells, but all of them have at least these four things. All right? Moving on, to differentiate between the two kinds, let's look at them side by side here. Prokaryotes. This is bacteria. Prokaryote means before a. Okay. So, keeping that in mind, prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. They just have DNA. Just DNA floating around. Pro means before, karyotic means nucleus. Just talked about that. They've been around an extremely long period of time. Okay, these were the first cells on Earth. While they are extremely small, that means they have no room for organelles. No organelles like a mitochondria that makes energy, or a nucleus that holds DNA, or a Golgi, which we'll talk about later, that transports stuff around. All right. What the bacteria has is basically these four things. That is it. So it is bare bones, but it still has the capability of functioning on its own and reproducing. So that's important. Now, with eukaryotes, the U stands for true, and karyote stands for nucleus. Again, so U, true, karyote means nucleus. So these cells have a nucleus. And what a nucleus does is it holds DNA, keeps it safe. Think of the nucleus as a bank. It holds your, important information, and if you need it, you got to go to the bank and actually get it. Okay? So, these have evolved actually more recently than bacteria. They haven't been around as long, and it's they have evolved from bacteria, okay, over time, but they're a little more complicated, okay. These organisms have organelles, and when I may mention here cytoskeleton and cell membrane, they also, you know what, they also exist over here too. The prokaryote has these. But you can add on to the list here for eukaryotes. So we're talking about a nucleus. We're talking about a Golgi, which we'll get to. We're talking about mitochondria, like I mentioned earlier. So all of these are really important, and it's going to be, we're going to study them in a little bit here in actually the next chapter. But knowing the differences between these two is going to be important too, because not all cells are the same. The smaller you get, the less you have in you. Eukaryotes are a little more complicated and bigger than prokaryotes. So let's look at them then. Here is our prokaryote on the right-hand side. You can see that this cell just has a bunch of DNA in it. Okay, this blue stuff is DNA. It has our cell membrane around the outside. These little dots in there are ribosomes. And it's got cytoplasm just floating around in there. It's all floating in cytoplasm. This is extremely small. If you're going to draw this next to the animal cell, it would probably look like this big. Okay? So that cell is really like that big compared to the other one. They're really, really tiny. Animal cells and plant cells are a lot bigger. They have a lot more stuff in them. You can see, yeah, look, we've got DNA here, but we've also got this structure, and that structure, and this one, and these structures down here. So it's a lot bigger, a lot more full organelle. All of these things are called organelles. We'll get into more specifics on those later. Plant cells are a little different from animal cells in that they have a structured wall. So you'll notice this one looks more like a cube, right? Or a box. That cube is because the plant cell has what's called a cell wall, okay? When we get into organelles, that'll be more apparent. But these help plants stand up. You can also see here that plants have a lot more blue in them. This is all extra water. Animal cells don't have a lot of extra water in their cells. They also aren't green, okay? Plants are green, animal cells are not green. That's a difference as well. So there are some minor differences between these two, but again, they are more similar to each other than they are to the prokaryote over here, which is a tiny bacterial cell. So that's going to do it for our introduction to cell basics. We'll finish reading about this in class, and then we'll move on to organelles. If you have any questions, please come see me in the morning or after school. I'm usually available. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.